Hello, and welcome to the reality-bending vampiric experience of Daywatch. Daywatch is a direct sequel to the game called Nightwatch that I have recently reviewed as well, so if you haven't already, I recommend checking that video out first for the sake of context at least. Nightwatch was a fun little janky tactical RPG, and Daywatch looks almost exactly like its predecessor. I mean, they're sharing the same engine and have a whole lot of assets, even those dumb idle animations. They were even released just a year apart from each other. I can only wonder what was up with the short development time frame, low budget aside, but the developers of the game themselves made me a bit more curious. Most sources will say that Daywatch was developed by Neval Interactive, and in a way, it's true. But in reality the game was developed by Targem Games, who were at the time recently acquired by Neval. What I and some of my old-time viewers know Targem well for is their Hard Rock Apocalypse series that were made during roughly the same time as Daywatch. And those games had the same exact thing going on, with reusing the same engine, the same assets, just making the plot different with minimal changes to gameplay. That was an interesting pattern to notice. Anyway, let's get to the matter at hand now. Daywatch, the game, as opposed to the book or the movie, directly continues the plot of Nightwatch, the game, as opposed to the book or the movie, taking place half a year after the events of the first game and reusing all of the main characters and then adding some new ones. This time the player gets to switch sides, in a way, and plays the other enigma among the others, Anna, the Dark Witch. The main premise of this story is that after the events of the first game, Anna tried living a regular life, not being involved with the affairs of the Watchers. But she's unwillingly pulled back in as her beloved light counterpart, Stas, turned out not to be out of the game, but rather turned pretty much into an insane light fanatic willing to uncompromisingly destroy anything dark related, which is unlike the old Stas at all. While not being an actual member of Daywatch, Anna takes shelter in a bar that acts as a safe haven for the Dark Ones, called the Fat Vampire, where she meets her companions and plans her moves. Gameplay-wise, the meat of Daywatch is almost exactly the same as Nightwatch's. The controls are all the same and I didn't even have to refamiliarize with skills, as they were left the same too. It's just that the dark side has slightly different classes that have ever so slightly different selections of skills available to them than the ones in Nightwatch. The main character, Anna, no longer gets to choose a class in the beginning of the game. She is always a witch now, which is very close to the Enchanter from Nightwatch. It makes sense plot-wise that a linear story would have characters be specific classes, but it sometimes feels odd when the old playable characters turn out to have different classes than what I had chosen for them. Still, gameplay-wise, I wasn't a big fan of Anna's predetermined class. Having a character that can make healing items is extremely important, but that also makes her one of the worst damage dealers, which was very painful throughout this game. You'll see. I should also mention that the game doesn't have that lovely English voiceover anymore, at least the version I managed to hunt down. The game was also somewhat harder to track down, since it seems like the English version was never released in a physical format and digital distribution wasn't all that popular yet. The original Russian voiceover is not the best I've heard either this time around. The game did at least have English subtitles and menus, but the translation was one of the worst I've seen. Knowing enough Russian to be able to understand a native speaker telling me to go fuck myself when I try asking them where the library is? Why do we always need to ask for directions to a library in language classes? I could tell that the translation is not the most accurate and misses a lot of flavor in speech. It's more like a rough interpretation, just focusing on the main point people are trying to get across, while omitting a lot of details. There were also a lot more grammatical mistakes than in my video scripts, and that's a lot. Even when the translation would be grammatically correct, it would severely lack consistency. For example, the dimension called the Gloom was canonically established to be called the Gloom, well, at least in the movies in the first game. In this game, it's called the Twilight though. First of all, I guess it sort of works as a direct translation, but then in the very same short paragraph it would also be referred to as the Dusk. What the heck, game? It feels like just a rough draft for the translation that was left as is. I legitimately thought it was a fan translation at first, but it isn't. I mean, even Anna's, the main character's name, is consistently spelled differently. Let's get back to the gameplay for now. After my overall pleasant experience playing Nightwatch, I was very much in the mood for more of the same, but I was skeptical about Daywatch. I thought it would be shorter, jankier, and less thought out. To my great surprise, Daywatch actually improves upon Nightwatch in a lot of ways. My main complaint with Nightwatch was that it felt like a battle marathon. Daywatch felt a lot better paced in that regard. There would be a lot more downtime between the fights, not only because there would be more creative objectives, puzzles, and level exploration, but also because the Fat Vampire Bar acted as a very nice intermission between most missions, where you get to hear some info about the main plot, pick which companions you want to get for the next adventure, and just overall rest a bit from the non-stop action. Some of the companions would be a bit more developed as characters, while others felt like completely random people. But they were all willing to help out a fellow Dark One. It's just that they would often not want to travel with one another, all being thirsty for Anna only. The shapeshifter Peter was one of the thirstiest ones, and was willing to have another party member tag along, so I would get Vladimir the Dark Mage as well, so I'd have one of each class. That was my main gang. There would also be Peter's sister Tatiana, who was also a shapeshifter, but she was real annoying. Then there was Marina, who was also a witch, so I never used her. It just felt redundant. The last option was a bit more unique, Vasily the Vampire. He would insist on always working alone, not counting Anna of course, because he's an extra thirsty boy, and the skillset would be somewhere in between of mages and enchanters, with some unique vampire abilities, most important of which was draining life, which also did really good damage. There is this one mission where it's mandatory to have Vasily in the party and he has to fight maybe 20 dudes by himself, and he can actually pull it off, so that's impressive. The one annoying thing about recruitable companions was having to assign them healing items every single time. When it comes to fighting, there was an addition of special abilities. These would not require energy or action points, instead they would have a global cooldown and would require to have a specific regular skill learned or a specific party composition. I didn't find these too useful though, even if it was a nice addition to the arsenal. The cool light-based weapons were quite useless this time around since I'd be mostly fighting light ones, but guns were still nice. It was real nice to see the game try making more varied quest objectives. There was a lot more stealth, and it seemed to work ever so slightly better now. It would just be incredibly annoying when there would be a lot of NPCs in the area and I would have to wait a long time for them all to take their turns every couple of steps. The destructible environment got upped a notch too. Locked door? I can knock half of the wall down now with several fireballs. Multiple floor building? I can actually break a hole in the floor and make enemies fall in using knockback. That would be hilarious. The more varied gameplay led to a lot more confusion though, and I needed to consult a walkthrough during almost every single mission since quite a few non-combat mechanics felt half-baked. There were a couple of completely new features in the game. First, there was this Disney reading phone app minigame, where before each mission you would need to solve a puzzle which determines the difficulty of the upcoming mission. There would be multiple colored beams that you would need to direct to this yellow thing using mirrors, prisms, and other devices. There would be 3 laser colors: green, blue, and red, and you could have up to 3 of each color reach destination. Green and red would directly affect enemies' combat stats, green making combat easier and red harder. Blue would unlock extra dialogues, things to discover, and a chance to avoid some certain fight, so I would really want to solve the puzzle as good as I could. The puzzle was easy to grasp, but tricky to get the best outcome, and it was actually entertaining to play. Then there was some visual character customization. Throughout the game you could find haircuts and clothing that can be added to your wardrobe, or paranja as it's oddly called in this game. Pretty much all the choices would look horrendous, but they would have great stat boosts or even immunities to certain spells, which is incredibly useful. Can't silence me and my speed glasses now! Several hours in, the game was really winning me over. Its systems felt a bit more deep. The story and character motivation slightly more reasonable and captivating, but then the superfluous amount of jank in an already jank game started to poke out the bag. Some choices about the presentation were weird. I generally like the new UI, especially the hotbar being more functional, but the menu window would have two X buttons. One would turn the menu off completely, one would go a page back. Now which one is which? These windows would also have a barely visible giant face overlaid on them for some damn reason. It's so bizarre looking, and it's barely visible, so I would often forget that it's even there, until my brain unexpectedly fixates on that creepy expression again. The soundtrack wasn't wonderful, but there would be this one peaceful theme that was incredibly unfitting to the game, and it would play all the damn time. It sounds like generic restaurant music. My best explanation for that is that's how Anna sees the world. Stas in the first game was a hot-headed dude, and he would have intense music banging in his little brain. Meanwhile, Anna is supposed to be a girl, and sees the world through a prism of romance. Blah. There would also be these weird shadows that would get burned into the ground after moving the camera, looking like an aftermath of an atomic explosion. The worst is yet to come though. Nightwatch already was mental with the knockback skills and the weird physics. Now Daywatch seems to break every single law of physics and bend the fabric of reality itself. At least it doesn't fall behind the movie. The movie's okay though. Since I mentioned the knockback, let's start with that. There would be some rare occasions where knockback would clip people through walls in Nightwatch. In Daywatch, there would be a lot more indoor locations, and wall clipping would happen very consistently, pretty much to a game-breaking level. You would think that a force strong enough to push a person through a wall would turn them into mincemeat first, no? There was this bank level, which started as a stealth mission, but ended as a slaughter, so like always. Although I have no clue what alarmed the enemies. There were over 10 of them, and the 3 of us were stuck in this small room, hoping the doorway would work as a choke point. Unfortunately, there were a lot of mages among the enemies, and almost every single attempt at the fight, they would push poor Peter through a wall into a room that has no exits. Even trying to outlast enemies in the gloom without direct fighting wouldn't work, since I wouldn't be able to go anywhere. I'm used to finding and abusing broken game mechanics myself, but I don't usually expect the AI to consistently do it too. I figured that if the enemies can do that, I can too. And I would, in fact, successfully push maybe half of all the enemies into the room with no exit, making the fight a lot more manageable. If I'm standing roughly 90 degrees from a wall, and there's someone in between, I can successfully push the dude through the wall maybe 90% of the time, assuming there isn't much behind the wall. What was even fuckier is that the enemies were actually able to escape the inescapable room by climbing walls. There is a climbing mechanic in the game that sometimes would be a lifesaver, but usually it's just a dumb thing that makes people ignore stairs for the sake of shitty parkour. Obviously, I cannot climb walls though, because there's a ceiling. Well, not to AI there isn't, they just go right through it.
Что это за идиот?
There would be a mission where I had to steal a bus. The same one that did the front flip, I believe. Except that during a fight, I accidentally wrecked it. Oh, but the cutscene started and now it's fine. Oop, not anymore. I guess you can't escape fate. This leads me to a mission on the highway. It was quite confusing to begin with. I tried fighting everyone off multiple long attempts until I figured out it's not possible and I'm supposed to run the opposite way. I know that turn-based combat tends to bug a lot of people, and there are countless jokes about everyone having to politely wait till someone else does something, and how ridiculous that would be in real life. Daywatch is making me believe that its turns actually freeze time for everyone but one person. Sevordo style. Except, it only freezes time for people. You see, There are moving cars on the highway, and both me and my enemies are running across it in turn-based mode. So suckers are just standing on the path and are getting hit by cars while being unable to move. That was one of the dumbest things I've ever witnessed in the game. My explanation is that everyone is frozen, including the drivers, but not the vehicles. People are just peacefully driving when BAM! They're frozen and they can't lift the foot off the gas pedal. Imagine all the car crashes and traffic-related fatalities turn-based combat must cause. Finally, the game asks you to sneak a lot, but sometimes it wouldn't be a legitimate option. In this shopping mall mission, my game would consistently crash if I successfully sneak out the mall after enemy reinforcements are called in. During a cutscene, my characters just stare at each other silently, frozen by the eldritch fear of knowing that if I touch a single button, the game will crash and their world reality will collapse until I rewind time by reloading the game and fight all of the enemies instead. All that I can still struggle through, but the game dives from being really amusing and intriguing into being quite pitiful in the last third. But that will require me to get into the story-sensitive spoiler discussion, so if you want to avoid that and would rather choose the path of a struggler yourself, skip to this timestamp. So you want to hear a story, eh? They watch a story is quite Romeo and Julietian in a way, that it focuses on a forbidden love between a dark one and a light one, members of factions that are eternally at war. The game begins pretty chill with Anna just going about her daily business. It's the first couple of areas where most of the main side characters are introduced to. There's Anna's neighbor, who's an old hag, Vasily the vampire that's just hanging out in the park, and the shapeshifter Peter, who came to help Anna beat some street thugs in his Zhiguli, disguised as a BMW. Events take motion when Peter's Zhiguli and Nightwatch's bus collide and they get into a fight. Anna's forced to retreat to the nearby dark bar and get back up. Right from these first moments, the game showcases that the Light Ones are not necessarily all that good abusing their authority over the Dark Ones, and the Dark Ones are simply forced to retaliate in order to survive. It creates a bit of a dissonance though. You see, it makes sense to make the bad guys relatable if it's their story that's being explored, and the game's tagline also says, "Be dark in the game, not in life." The Dark Ones are meant to be the objectively evil ones, but they barely feel like such. They're not having some war elimination plans or whatever like that, and Anna's not even a member of Daywatch. She isn't officially supporting any faction, she just happened to be in the wrong place at the right time. During one of the first missions, where Anna needs to help Peter free his captured family, she runs into Stas, who after the events of the first game was also supposed to live a regular life, but instead was acting completely unlike himself, being a light zealot, killing Peter's parents. While the Night Watch does have authority over Dark Ones, outright killing them is still punishable crime, and Stas is immediately sacked by the Inquisition. Anna, being more intimately familiar with the old Stas and actually having strong feelings for him, realizes that he has been charmed in some way and forced to give reason for more conflict between the two sides. While mostly siding with the Dark Ones and being hunted by the Night Watch, Anna sets out to uncover what happened to Stas and undo the spell. Regular companions aside, Anna is regularly aided by the fat vampire's bartender Alexander, who is a real MVP, and one of Zavlon's top agents, Alice, who along with helpful tips gaslights Anna into unknowingly helping Daywatch's secret agendas. During her investigation, Anna finds out that the change in Stas's character happened during his visit to the Lincoln's Memorial, where he underwent a strange ritual that was supposed to unleash Light's full potential in them. Also, Anna gets to the closed memorial by telling the guards she's Russian, and that sort of thing happens multiple times in this game. What's up with some Russian people thinking they can do whatever they want just because they're Russian? I realize this sounds mean, but I've had these sort of experiences with Russians outside of Russia. Anyway, Anna manages to get concrete evidence that Stas has been manipulated by Gesser, the leader of Nightwatch, and sneak into his trial to present the said evidence. Having postponed the trial, Anna seeks a way to undo the ritual, and gets directed by Alice to meet an old Dark One, who has lived through all sorts of historical events and might be able to help, even if she's gone mad throughout the years. Somehow Anna doesn't immediately recognize her home address, and gets surprised that it's her old hag neighbor that's the ancient Dark One. This mission is overall hilarious, constantly fighting the granny, but it's a bit suspicious, because normally others can see other others, that's a bit of a mouthful, auras, and tell if they're dark or light ones. Meanwhile, Anna never mentioned anything about the granny in the beginning of the game. It turns out that the old hag was a fake, and told Anna only what Alice made her tell to further Savlon's plans. Not knowing that, Anna does as she's told and goes out to destroy an artifact that's in possession of the Light Ones, that might drain Stas of his power. What she wasn't told is that the one who destroys the artifact also absorbs the power, making Anna a great one, and getting her pursued by both the Light and the Dark Ones. With the Inquisition still being after Stas and both watches trying to catch Anna, she decides that she needs to undergo a similar ritual herself, so she would have enough power to undo the spell cast on Stas. Bartender Alexander ends up being the one who can help Anna with that and teleports her to the Knot of Forces, and that's when the game gets real messy. You see, ever since the beginning of Nightwatch, the game's trained me to utilize my entire party, and Daywatch also focused a lot on avoiding combat altogether up until this point. From here on out, Anna's all on her own. Besides, her class is not the best at damage dealing like I mentioned before. Sure, she would have some slow acting spells, but she would need to get rid of enemies fast in order to survive herself. But the game turns into a battle marathon yet again, and it's also some of the most difficult battles so far, not only being outnumbered, but also fighting some of the strongest opponents. At least I can throw some of them down the Eiffel Tower. I would really need to utilize every option I can in combat. What was also incredibly messy is that I started to run out of healing items, and there isn't really a reliable way to acquire those. Only enemies would drop them, and it's not guaranteed either. Besides, I would need to use these throughout the game too much to be able to save them up. Even worse, only after beating the game I've heard that the less party members the player picks, the more experience a single character gets, meaning that I always got the smallest amount of experience for Anna, always going for a larger party. That part was completely unintuitive, and to this point I'm not fully sure if it is true, because it would be hard to tell if the enormous numbers of experience points change because of the party size or the type and amount of foes filled, or both. Also, when picking companions in the Fat Vampire, I would get to level up, even those I don't use, so they wouldn't become irrelevant and match my level. Which is a nice touch, but I thought everyone got experience no matter what. Now I was alone, without healing items, and with quite terrible damage output. I complimented the first game for being surprisingly well balanced. Daywatch is a completely wreck in that regard, especially in this last bit. Anyway, Anna gets transported to the Knot of Forces, which is like a pocket dimension, with the Eiffel Tower in it, and a terrible soundtrack that's supposed to sound French? In there she has to pass multiple trials, all of which are difficult fights against foes projected by her own mind. After defeating all her inner demons, Anna receives actual demonic powers and becomes a great Dark One. At that point, she acts like she's invulnerable and disregards both of the Watches and the Inquisition. While the demonic form is pretty strong, it's not quite invulnerable, especially since she has to fight groups of vampires. And as opposed to Nightwatch, where vampires sure did suck, in Daywatch, vampires are fucking. Remember how I told how Vasily would be able to hold off large groups alone due to his life drain ability? Well, the enemy vampires can do that too. It's a real chore getting through these fights, and my rule is that if a game fucks with me that much through its terrible balance or bossy mechanics and is no longer fun, I'm allowed to cheat. I would honestly recommend doing it too. In the very end, Anna faces Stas in this new grey wig.
I'm a witcher.
He is somewhat weakened, but is still a mindless light zealot and only believes Anna is telling the truth after she kicks his butt. It turns out that Geser and Zavalon were pretty much in bed with each other and have been orchestrating Stas and Anna becoming great others all along, as yet another pissing contest between the two of them. That was a bit annoying. What was even more annoying is that Stas had done something after believing Anna and realizing that Geser manipulated him, but whatever he did was obscured by a terrible camera angle, so I shall never know. Did he die? Did he run away? Whatever happened, it would have been nice to know during the last choice to make. The Inquisition had offered me to join the ranks since I did a good job uncovering the scheme and being more or less neutral, or to leave and live a regular quiet life. A normal life was the goal all along, but given the presumption that Stas is alive and spends his days together with Anna, if he's dead, being part of the Inquisition might not be that terrible. Whatever choice I would make, the game would just end with a short line from an Inquisitor. No ending cutscene, no epilogue, nothing. That was pretty damn disappointing. Not only do I not really get a happy ending, which I don't mind too much in a more mature story that's all about trickery, it also ends very abruptly. It's like if the Lord of the Rings would cut straight to the credits right after the moment the ring fell into the lava, and the viewer was left not knowing if Frodo survived or not, and if it worked at all. I didn't expect much from the story, but after being surprised by somewhat more believable writing than in the first game, I was very let down. Enough of this, let's get the spoiler skippers back. Have you heard that there is another game based on Nightwatch that predates Nightwatch the game? Me neither, up until recently. Ladies and gentlemen, I present you Nightwatch Racing, or Daywatch Racing, or Mafia Racing as it's called in localizations for some bizarre reason. And yes, you heard right. It's a racing game, which is absolutely mental. Never in my life have I thought that I would play a dark fantasy racing game based in modern Moscow. But now I have, and boy is it good. Not. I'm actually a fan of these sort of racing games where I'm meant to bump into others and use all sorts of power-ups, but this was honestly one of the worst racing games I played. First of all, its releases are weird. There are 3 different ones in Russian. The only difference between Night and Daywatch Racing is the soundtrack. I'm not kidding. And there would be an edition that just has both of these games in one instead of merging the soundtrack, which would be a lot more optimal. Daywatch Racing is the version that's rated for mature audiences, because its soundtrack is Russian rap that not only has cursing, but also slurs in it. It also makes my ears very sad. Nightwatch Racing has Russian rock and it's a lot more bearable. This game also has the infamous Star Force copy protection, which has the potential to damage actual hardware and is real difficult to remove. I recommend looking into that if you're into older games. Also, avoid uncracked Star Force like plague. It had destroyed my OS before when I tried installing Lada Racing Club. Nightwatch Racing was released in 2005 and was based on the 2004 movie, and uses some of its footage and screenshots for character portraits. Ever wanted to also flip that yellow bus? I sure did, and my expectations were way exceeded with even crazier shit 2 minutes in. You can play as one of the members of either watch, all movie characters, and each of them would have a different vehicle and special ability. You could either flip through the manual to see who can do what, or you can do this silly personality test and let the game decide who fits you best based on your moral compass, which is absolutely very relevant to racing. It also looks like all of the cars are bought from wish.com. You've got your Audis, Morgwagens, and WMBs. The idea of the game is that the watches have decided to solve their conflicts peacefully through sports, and it would be nice if it wasn't a menace to regular traffic and if the guys weren't bombarding each other's cars with everything they've got. Each of the 6 tracks has a conflict tied to them, but all of them would be events from the movie, so it's pretty much random stuff attached to a shovelware racing game. When it comes to the special abilities, Nightwatch members would be able to summon Gesser, who stops everyone in a certain radius, and Daywatch members could summon Zavalon, who flips the nearest car. Then every individual character would have a unique ability, like repelling other vehicles, throwing enemies into the air, or super speed, which fucked me up 100% of the time I use it. The driving itself is some of the worst I've experienced. I could barely call the physics. It feels like instead of controlling the car, I'm only giving the driver vague suggestions. It wouldn't help that some of the cars would behave different. For example, the famous bus felt absolutely horrid to drive, and the bootleg BMW was way nicer. It's just that when you pick a character, you can no longer switch to anyone else. You have to create a whole new profile. The whole game would feel extremely chaotic to me. Winning or losing would pretty much depend entirely on luck rather than skill. I only learned that I should usually avoid speed boosts, and that the gloom is good not because of the double damage, but because there's no random traffic in it, which can be deadly. Because of the chaotic nature of the game, I would constantly jump between being the first and the last in the race. The AI is mental with the way they drive. My allies would ram me, random people would do sharpest turns possible, not letting me do normal ones, and everyone would take off so insanely fast at the start line. The goal of the race is either to finish first or to kill all 3 of the opponents, which is a lot less likely. I like ramming, but not when a single bump into anything messes me up completely and drops me several positions lower. Nightwatch, or Daywatch, or Mafia Racing is not a good game, but it exists, and I thought it would be fun to include it here while it's relevant. I'm not sure if it should exist though. There are only 6 different tracks, poor technical execution, and a licensed soundtrack that I most likely shouldn't play on YouTube. I was entirely bewildered, from the moment I discovered it till it crashed several tournament tracks in and I had no more patience to play. I veered off the main course quite a bit though. Let's turn back to summing up my thoughts on Daywatch the RPG. So overall, I'm not even sure if I can really recommend Daywatch. Nightwatch was a blast, even with all of its flaws. And I had quite a bit of fun with Daywatch too, but its flaws started to detract more than its worst suffering through towards the end. I was a fan of the deeper character customization features and more creative approach to missions. After all, it made more sense thematically to pursue goals through stealth and trickery more in a story like this, where both the night and the day watches would be using schemes after schemes trying to defeat one another. In comparison to Nightwatch, the story was quite a bit more interesting. Stas was a bit of a thick-skulled protagonist. He would agree to pretty much anything without any questions right after being initiated in Nightwatch, an organization he knew nothing about up until that point in his life. Most conversations would just sound like, "Go kill all of these dudes just because they're dark ones." Okie dokie. Meanwhile, Anna's story felt a lot more nuanced, with her not being able to trust anyone much, and just wanting a peaceful life with Stas, who was made mad and blamed for Gesser's crimes. I would actually be intrigued to play more of the game to see how the mystery of Stas's madness uncovers and how Anna could save him when he doesn't even think he needs saving. It's no longer just blindly following some ideology.
The name of this trash can is ideology.
The pacing of the game was way better, giving the player more room to breathe in between the tough fights. It's just that those fights got way too unbalanced, forcing the player to go through a lot of tough fights completely alone and with pretty much no healing items, ditching all of the nice party mechanics in the last third of the game. Aside from feeling like a frustrating and unrewarding chore, it just got rid of the bits that were the most fun about the game, which was being able to control multiple characters, them nicely completing each other's gaps in skill sets, and the sneaky non-fighty bits. It was a CBT session with a disappointing ending, just like my... Thank you for watching. It was surely interesting for me to explore the rise and fall of the Nightwatch series, consuming a different flavor of dark fantasy, which happened to be quite nice. I think I had my share for tactical games for some time now though. That's it for this video. I'll see you in the next one.